Okay, thanks again for joining. Now that we're all here, we'll go ahead and just run through. This webinar is on our Green Infrastructures Grant, and to be able to learn more about what we're putting out this request for proposals for, and with the goal of supporting Indigenous sustainability and all of these endeavors that a lot of folks are really wanting to do within their communities. So without further ado, our agenda for today, we'll go over sort of who we are, Bridget, Joni, and I, and our organization that we work for, not Ilhi Fund, what we're doing here, why we're sending out this request, some examples of projects, and ways that we can support anyone interested in applying, and just more questions and some space for questions and answers. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or speak up at any point too. But we'll just roughly go through this. I'll pass it off to Bridget to lead the introductions.
Great, thanks, Cece. My name is Bridget Ray Boujou. I am zooming in today from the traditional territory of the Stachys people, now part of the Squaxin Island tribe. Stachys means where the black bears gather, and that's because of the abundance of fish here at the bottom of the Deschutes River in what's otherwise known as Olympia, Washington. I was raised here in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa descendant, and a longtime supporter and board member of the Na'a Ilhi Fund. I stepped into a staff position for a 3-year interim to help develop the programs and grant making. And so we are thrilled today to be able to offer the Green Infrastructure Grant. And my background is in green, sustainable, integrated green infrastructure. I'm a tribal planner and an avid participant organizer for Green Team planning in the intertribal canoe journey every year. And although we've been taking a break. So without further ado, I would like to pass it on to Cece to introduce herself, and then Joni.
Waukanis, Anishwanisha, Cece Hoffman, Washnashimatilla, Nichawi Kaniknashwa. Hello, my name is Cece Hoffman. I'm from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and I grew up over there. I'm Umatilla and Nimifu on my mom's side and Ojibwe on my dad's side, and came up over to Coast Salish Duwamish lands in 2016 to attend the University of Washington, and started working with Na'a Ilhi Fund just about a year ago, and have been the environmental justice program assistant, so helping with different work within the organization, helping out with our Sovereign Futures cohort, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end about, as well as some just other awesome things that come up, and the good work that we're able to do, some food sovereignty, garden work, some political advocacy work. So yeah, I'm happy to be here where I physically am, here with Na'a Ilhi Fund, and here today to talk about this with you and whoever chooses to watch. So I'll pass it off to Joni next. You're on mute, Joni.
My name is Jonahcrines. I'm a Gaidakota Walker River Paiute from Shores, Nevada. I grew up on my reservation, and then I went off to college in Idaho. I have my degree in business administration and computer information systems. I joined Na'a Ilhi February 1st as a grants program officer. And this is the third grant we've released since I've been here. Prior to this one, we did a food sovereignty grant, and we awarded $250,000. We just recently, the grant committee met for the Native Community Crisis Relief, and I will have to process those award letters, but that amounted to $187,000. And I'm excited to launch this green infrastructure. not my background, but I'm really looking forward to see the work that people are doing. Thank you for joining us, Jacob.
So Ilhi Fund was started back in 2005 by Susan Balbus and Bernadette Zambraro, and they had a vision of women's cultivation and work and stewardship of Mother Earth. And so it started out as Tierra Madre Fund and then was rebranded to using the Chinook word Ilhi, which means Mother Earth in Chinook jargon, because of the Chinook trade language was used widely throughout the Pacific Northwest, and that is our service area. And so the goal and purpose of the Ilhi Fund is to build capacity in our Native communities through grant making and leadership development, and really through an abundance mindset and with traditional values leading the way. We're focused on Indigenous ecology and sovereignty, wise action in order to protect this place and to do good placekeeping as Native people, women, and for the greater good of our community and the world. Herself, we view Mother Earth herself as a being, and that she has her own rights, and that we walk in relationship with her. Next slide.
Oh, do you want to say something?
No, I think this is the lateral pass to Joni's part of the, yeah. So we're going to briefly go over the RFP that Jonahcrines has been stewarding this work and doing a great job. So we'll let you take the lead there, Joni.
Okay, we're going to quickly go through the applications process and briefly explain our approach. Next slide, please, Cece. The new vision of philanthropy in Indian country is to we're adapting the basis of trust-based philanthropy and community-based philanthropy, guided by the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we intentionally create a simplified and streamlined application process. We embrace the trust-based philanthropy in that our relationships with our grantees are based on mutual trust and respect. And our goal is to provide funding to those doing the work in the communities and whose work lifts up our hopes and our people. So the result in the simplified application process is that it's more personal and less transactional, more trusting and less suspicious, and more about sharing power than maintaining the status quo. Community-based philanthropy allows communities to self-identify how best to care for their own. And community philanthropy is a force for building local assets, capacity, and trust, and ultimately a way to shift the power closer to the ground so that local people have more control over their destiny. So the application in itself is very simple, and we allow the applicants to provide. There's lots of space for you to write about what your work it is and what you're going to do and how it's going to affect the people. The thought is that a very complicated application process is in its own form discriminatory in its nature. So our goal is not to provide, excellent grant writers in the Indian country. Our goal is to get the funds out in community for people that are doing the important work, and to do that in an expedient way. Hey, Cece, can we see the next slide, please? So the easiest way to apply is to go to our website, and there's a grant opportunities tab. And then you'll see the current opportunity is this green infrastructure capacity building grant. And then just click on that apply now, and it'll take you directly to submittable. I would urge you to apply sooner than later, because then I can review and provide feedback. I'm not a voting member on the grant making committee, and my goal is to assist our people in providing, a strong application that moves towards funding. What we seek to support, the project should include one of the following. It's on the list of projects we wish we aim to fund. So there's a question that is, please explain your project in great detail, what you plan to do and how. Here is where we want, a robust dialogue of outlining what you're going to do and how you plan to do it. The application will accept one sentence, but especially in this particular grant, we need details. The only other area that I want to emphasize is also the budget detail. We have specific boxes you can enter as zero, but we really do want the details on how you're going to spend the money. And again, insufficient or vague budget information will decrease the strength of your application. And you can attach a file in several places. So if you feel like there's not enough room and you want to go into more detail or have an outline, please attach everything. The grant making committee will see it all. Come to the next slide, please. There's our main objective. NIF seeks to fund development of projects that aim to revitalize and strengthen Mother Earth and her living systems. And this green infrastructure capacity building grant can touch all of those living systems. And we really look forward to seeing the work that people are doing. I think that's the end of mine. Back to you, Bridget.
I'll switch back and Bridget will go into more examples and the nitty gritty, but if you have any questions, especially about the logistics of applying or what Joni had explained, please feel free to put them in the chat while we switch over.
So we've listed several examples of different types of green infrastructure projects, but this is not an exhaustive list. There will be another informational webinar on July 23rd from 1 to 2 to ask more specific questions about your particular project. So there will be that follow-up opportunity. But today we're just going to go over some examples. And the first example is integrated water systems and stormwater management. Water, protecting the water and taking care of the water and all the people that live in it is the basis for our food and for a lot of our economic vitality. And so some of the ways that we protect and take care of water, old and new, first of all, we're always looking at the integrated approach of what types of, there are multiple points that you can help keep the water clean by prevention, help treat it and clean it and filter it through reuse or wastewater treatment, gray water recycling. There are planning documents that you can do as far as a planning process for stormwater plans or wastewater planning. There's also code development that you can do. And there's, you know, what I have on this slide is basically an explanation of some of the management range of measures that we do to reduce and treat stormwater, like permeable surfaces, de-paving projects, plant and soil systems like bioswales, tree canopies, having the shoreline along rivers and riverside habitats to help with flooding and floodplain planning. So stormwater harvest and reuse, and then land conservation and restoration. The more trees and plants we have intact, the better the water cycle and oxygen, you know, and the nutrient load and different types of oxygen in the water. The composition of the water is good. So rain gardens, there are just so many ways, small and large, that are good examples of how we help water to you know stay. It's so important. And I will go on. So let's go to the next slide. Renewable energy and energy sovereignty. Renewable energy refers to energy that is not extractive. So there, you know, and there can be, some of this is debatable, and that's why it's important to vet your projects, to have a discussion, because sometimes there are energy that comes from dams that can be or not be considered as renewable or green energy. But generally, when we talk about renewable energy, we're talking about solar, wind, geothermal, and now there are some innovative new technologies that are kind of cusp technologies like wave action. And so again, planning documents, code development on green energy for, you know, your community or your tribe would qualify for as a project here. And at the next level, energy sovereignty refers to a community having control over its energy systems, as in planning, you know, ongoing planning process that is considered as part of the overall infrastructure for a tribe or community, and that it's got several different sources of energy that are monitored, regulated, and stewarded by the community. So community-owned utilities and plans to go off of a certain type of extractive energy to a renewable energy source, transition plans, just transition, just recovery. As renewable use grows, we look to modernize and keep innovating and improving our technology. So yeah, I think that's good. We could take a look at the next example. So my favorite, the one I have the most experience with, is integrated solid waste management. And that refers to, and at its best, solid waste is something that it can be a treasure or create a secondary use. But you know, any planning, and there are planning models out there that are available through the Tribal Solid Waste Advisory Network. There are a number of websites. For any one of these examples, there are a number of websites that can be shared depending on what people are planning to do. And so this includes reduction, reuse, recycle, recovery, which is a way of taking waste and processing it so that it's usable again, and then and compost. So, you know, at the top of that, waste prevention and education, which also includes positive procurement and buying things that won't break down, or instead of buying, you know, plastic cups that will be thrown away, incentivizing people to use well-built cups that'll last forever, or better yet, um, carve their own meal kits, mess kits, food bundles. And so some examples, on the ground examples, are Tribal Canoe Journey Green Team. Over the last 20 years, we've developed a system of recycling, reuse, positive procurement that has reduced the amount of waste going to the landfill by tons, and saved tribes money who were hosting, and saved, there's a meal planning that happens that way. There's compost, and it's also created this whole community, a vast army of people who sort garbage as their superpower. So there's that community building aspect as well. But as it continues, it grows and people learn to expect it. And we've created new habits within many tribal communities. For example, Bella Bella didn't have a lot of resources, but they had a lot of time to plan. So they wrote a grant and built a composting system. And when the canoe journey got there, the green team helped launch their recycling and their compost program, which has then gone on to create dirt, which they didn't have because it's on a rock, which now they have a community garden created with that dirt, that they didn't have fresh vegetables. They had to truck everything in, or it was hard to get a hold of fresh vegetables. So they save money in building and growing it. They raise their health rates by having the fresh food for their elders and youth programs, food programs. And they cut down on the cost for trucking the food waste off island. So there's the ripple effect is huge. And, you know, that's a win-win for everyone. That's how it's supposed to be. And they're very consciously minded. It's, you know, part of the shift is the thinking. So recycling and program and recovery centers. Again, the last example here is that you're creating green jobs and an economic development opportunity so a recovery center basically takes in a number of different items that people don't use anymore, or plastic, aluminum, that can be weighed and then sold to a secondary manufacturer who will use recycled materials and goods. And then it's also a great way for people to do re-entry into jobs, small jobs, if they just need a week or a month. There are many different levels that people can plug in and be involved. So, you know, just some ideas or examples of how solid waste management can be done. Next slide, please. So food sovereignty infrastructure. We have a food sovereignty grant, and so, you know, most of these will get handled under the food sovereignty grant, but it is technically a part of green infrastructure. And so if you were to have an integrated planning process that includes food sovereignty infrastructure, that would be things like community gardens, co-ops, food distribution centers, the built part of the infrastructure, the planning piece as well. And this could also include food production, like commercial kitchens, and sustainable agriculture, and food integration into housing and community hubs as part of the whole, as a master planning process. Like I said, we do have, and Joni mentioned earlier, we have because it's so important to us, we have a whole grant dedicated just to that. But if food infrastructure is part of another project, it also would fit under here and will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Next slide. Some additional notes and thoughts. So for the examples that we gave, there's another, you know, arm's length of other types of green infrastructure. And so I wanted to share the UN looks at infrastructure as sustainable development as interlinked. And so when you look at the built environment, that means things like living buildings, green transportation, smart grids. And we're not quite there yet in our grant making program, but they are worth mentioning as part of green infrastructure, because they're, infrastructure and buildings account for 30% of global resource consumption. And when you make a living building or consider construction materials that are locally sourced, sustainably made, you cut down on that consumption rate. It helps with the consumerism that happens. And so this is a pilot year for this green infrastructure grant. We will be looking to learn from our grantees as well. And what that means is that sustainable integrated green infrastructure, it can be soft or it can be hard. Soft infrastructure refers to things that are planning documents, codes, program development, and hard infrastructure refers to built environment like bricks and mortar, plants and soil systems, green materials, things that you construct, with the best interest of the planet in mind. So with that said, we do have some other ways to support the learning of, what is green infrastructure and how to innovate and implement in Indian country. Next slide. And Cece, would you like to say something about the Sovereign Futures Cohort?
Yeah, I can say a few things. So this will be our second year of doing the Sovereign Futures Cohort. Last year, we launched it for the first time, had an amazing group of 11 Indigenous folks across Turtle Island who each had their own projects that they helped develop along the course of 6 months. And there's a wide variety, and this time we're doing it starting in September. And we want to especially focus it around leadership development and leadership development of these green infrastructure projects. And so we're opening it up to anyone interested within the Pacific Northwest, and want to especially reach out to those who are granted this grant, the Green Infrastructures Grant, for them to have further support from there. So it'd be for 7 months, 2 hours a week with a $2,000 additional stipend. And like I said, beginning in September and going to April of next year. And along the process, it would just be a cohort of Indigenous folks learning from each other and learning from us at Ilhi Fund, and learning from additional Indigenous facilitators around topics such as project management, budgeting, Indigenous planning, regenerative economies, community-based project development, and a lot of other topics that we feel like could just help support folks who maybe have an idea of a project that they want to do in their community, or a project that they really feel like would be needed, but would like extra support on how do I actually get this project off the ground, as well as helping gain skills and connect with other Native folks who have similar ideas and passions and would like to be connected throughout the rest of their lives, and just have that additional support and communication with each other. And if there's anything that I missed, Bridget, you can definitely add too.
No, I think it's good capacity building for people who receive grants, but it's also good preparation if your project isn't quite there yet and you want to apply for a grant next year. It'll really help flesh it out and get some of the things. We found our cohort last year, learned a lot from each other. And I think one of the most beneficial things for the Sovereign Futures cohort is that the participants really shape the process and what it is they want to learn about. So there's some basics that we cover, like fundraising and project management 101, community organizing. But there are some that where we will we will find out from the cohort what their priorities are, and then we adjust our curriculum accordingly. So that's really, and it's really cool. It does require some dedication, and it's not, you know, getting a grant is not a requirement for being part of the cohort, and being part of the cohort is not a requirement for the grant. They just one informs the other. So it is an opportunity. It is, I want to clarify that it's not, you know, it dovetails nicely with this grant, but there are no requirements to be in the cohort to receive a grant. And I would just like to give Joni a chance to make any additions about or last comments before we wrap it up here, or go to question and answer.
Okay. I just wanted to specify that this particular grant is aimed at building capacity of groups and develop projects that will range in size with a maximum amount of 50,000 paid over 2 years. So I just want to bring that up because that is an important part of this particular grant. That's all I have.
And to also add about, we have a lot of connections within our organization and relationships that we've built of people who are interested in supporting different folks who want to apply to this grant. So if you would like any additional support, not from us or people who have more ties with the grant committee and everything, but we can definitely connect you with people who would be willing to like look over the application or talk through any projects. And we're also open to talking more too, but just for someone maybe a little bit more disconnected or
Technical assistance. Right, we can hook you up with some TA. So that concludes the sample projects for our capacity, our green infrastructure capacity building grant. Thank you for attending. And are there any questions before we hang up or hand off? Or okay. Great. That's a wrap. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Cece. Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks, Cece. All right.